Good morning, everyone, and I am pleased to be back with you with my dear friend Robert Sardello. Although sadly, this is the sixth and final installation of our talks on integral spiritual psychology. We bit off a lot this time. We're going to talk about the soul of America. Fairly timely topic, I'd say.
We'll even confine that a little more and concentrate on the soul of this land. And it touches into America, but America also has its unique soul. And this is the soul in relation to the land.
So, in the collected notes, you pointed out that the humans living here prior to the Europeans arriving would refer to themselves in such a way as that they were the land. They weren't the people on the land or the people of the land. They identified with the land itself.
Yeah. I don't even think that they thought of that. That just is given. It was only really quite a bit later when this Frank Waters, who's golly, he's an important writer and my favorite writer of all times. He was born in 1902, I think. At any rate, he lived in Taos and was very close to the Pueblo Indians, and then spent 3 years living with the Hopi, which are the Hopi are the original people of this land, and probably came from Asia. In fact, the other day I just read it was probably 7,000 years earlier than people thought.
Wow.
At any rate, he lived with them for 3 years, and they told him their whole cosmology that he then had translated, and is now the book called the Book of the Hopi. It's one of the truly great sacred books of the world. And he's the one that concludes, or from that says the Native Americans are the land. There's no difference between the land and the Native Americans. So when I began the working with the heart in 1992 or so, I began to notice. At first, it was another form of kind of soul presence with others, and it was meant to be between people. But I began to notice sensing and perceiving the land and nature. It began to change. It just began to be in a kind of incredible intimacy, and that has led to this investigating the relation of heart and earth.
Mm-hmm. So obviously that resonance was not with the Europeans who came here. And do we have a sense of what the early colonizers made of that? Did they notice something that was different, or did they simply dismiss it as primitivism or something?
Well, in terms of our way of working, I think that they also indeed were present with the land, but not in the same way as the Native Americans at all. Because as we'll see, there's, I mean, the Native Americans, they have the sense that they really still do this relation of heart and earth, where you take the, if you take the letter H from heart and move it at the end, it's earth, an anagram they call it, but it's way deeper than that. It's the first kind of clue that there's this reciprocity and unity of earth and heart. But there, and so, but there's this other force of earth. There is another force within earth here that is one of death. It's a force of death and a force of greed. And I think the people who came, they were much more in tune with that force than they were with the heart. And were immediately, started developing the land, cutting the trees, and immediately got caught in the fantasies of gold. And so there's that. See, that is so interesting that there's like they bring another dimension that looks like it's, oh, this is terrible. Look what they're doing. And it is in a certain way terrible. And we're suffering it now terribly. But somehow, because this is the land of these two forces of the heart on the one hand, and this other force is what Rudolf Steiner speaks of as Ahriman. It's just an actual spiritual being of the earth who, in that being, it promotes in the background of our awareness, promotes the activities that center around death. I mean, power and particularly greed. And greed is this really strange form of living death. I mean, because greed is a way of forgetting that we die. We get kind of taken into greed, and there's nothing else. There's not a sense of death anymore. It's more like keeping it at bay with the materialistic desires. And don't really have to do with things. Often it's desire for materialistic power.
So just to try to paint a clear picture, Steiner, as far as I know, is the only person that said something like this. He said that these Ahrimanic forces are here, they're everywhere, but they're here in a certain way.
Yeah.
And perhaps we can look at Native American culture as a way of being with those forces in a balanced way.
Yeah. Well, the heart is the balance for sure. And so they never had trouble with greed at all.
Right.
And so that it is saying that the Native Americans are the bearers of the force of balance. But yeah, now how to do this without, I mean, because it's not so much a matter of trying to in any way go back to the indigenous soul or anything of that sort. It's saying, well, the land itself is a place of heart forces, and then we can ask, well, how do we today make connection with those heart forces? How does it show up in this land, and how is this complexity between greed and death and heart, how does it show up in the world?
So greed is it's an egotism. It's for a materialistic power. It's for it serves to give the illusion of a kind of immortality or dismissal of death. And the effect of that is actually, in a paradoxical way, to actually create a culture of death.
It does. If we look at it, a particular way in which those destructive forces do live in the earth and bring about greed, it's the Native Americans in the region of the region around New York City where the Native Americans lived, that they were very, very aware of these forces of greed within the earth. And they have actually to do with iron. And iron is, iron is the force in the blood that is responsible for the forces of the will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Steiner says that these forces of iron in the blood, in a spiritual way, actually come from meteorites. The fault not laying around, but as they imagine how many meteorites are falling every moment. And they are bringing spiritual sense of iron into the world. That's different than the iron that is in a way trapped in the earth. And it's interesting that it was at this place. The name of it is High Tor. It's right near Tappan Zee Bridge, near New York City. That way, it was an iron mining area. That's where all the original iron to make the steel of the skyscrapers of New York City comes from. So you get that feeling of, oh my goodness, look at this transformation. Even in, say, the Twin Towers, or in a certain way, were citadels of greed. And I'm not judging it, just describing it. Means that was the financial center of the world. That's where all those forces of how do you get more money and collect money, and that's where they are centered. So there is this really interesting relation between the earth and the way that America, one aspect of it, develops.
And the difference between digging the iron out of the earth as opposed to being with the iron in this more spiritual sense.
Yeah.
Is it these forces of will? It's really interesting. So obviously it takes tremendous forces of will to extract iron from the earth. But I almost have this imagination of, as we do that, we actually inflate our will even more.
Oh yes, that's what it does. That's what it does. That's that picture of the, again, it's just descriptive. New York, just look at New York City, and it's these harmonic forces of that kind of iron made vertical in the world.
Mm. Mm.
And then they kind of house the housing, but they're not neutral. I mean, that steel in those buildings are radiances of the forces of will.
The forces of will in the service of greed.
Greed. And now that see that kind of metamorphosis, changes into corporate America. Very interesting word. Means corporate doesn't only mean a group. I mean, but like the corporeal body. That's the least. Well, it's an important aspect, but it's only one aspect of the human being. The corporeal is the it's not the physical. It's the body that is bounded by this form that we see each other. That's the corporeal body. But a corporation in our corporeal body is the dying body. This is every moment dying away. No, within I don't. It's the whole body. Every cell of the body is replaced quite frequently. So we're always with death. Suppose that makes life possible. Makes a sense of life possible. But a corporation is just, it means it's the organized body of the forces of death. And which kind of see that if you're really a corporate person, you have to be clever and cold and calculating, and you have to look like you're heartful and really get to know you, but it's all in the service of of money, and there's that really interesting relation of death and money. We see it. I mean, all our coinage and every bill has an image of a hero of the land, someone who gave their life for this land. So that's like our tender is death. And how different that is, for example, than the Iroquois, where let's see, where they were very close to both death and grieving. It's I don't know if we'll go into it. Maybe later. It has to do with the story of Hiawatha, and he was really the individual who brings the absolutely necessary force of grief as the most important dimension of life. I mean, if I have to define the human being, I would say the human being is one who grieves. Without grief, we're not fully. That's what makes us most human, is the recognition of the closeness of death.
And it's not something that's merely confined to ceremonies at certain times. It's
No,
very much present.
right. That's our difficulty, is that again in this sort of corporatized America, grief becomes ceremonial only. It's not a part of ongoing life. So when 9/11 occurred, which was like this moment of death, there was deep grieving, but also our president at the moment said, "Don't let this stop. Go out and shop." That's what he said. Remember, Bush said, "Go out and shop," and grieving didn't last. I mean, we remember it every year and kind of feel it every year, but it's not an ongoing sensibility. It's kept away.
And in the notes, you suggest that this how this that because we keep death and life so separate, where we really should be in a mode of life, death, death, life, because it's always happening. It is the primary reality. But because we try to take death and put it over here, postpone it, or not look at it, or however you want to put it, it prevents us from perceiving certain aspects of nature having to do with her ability to be self-creating, how she is always becoming.
Yeah.
We're no longer with living, because we've so pushed death away, we are no longer with the living processes all around us.
Right. In order to be present to the ongoing creating that is the force, the universal force of love happening, to be present to that requires this kind of inner intimacy of heart and death, which is the experience of that intimacy is calmness. Being able to be perfectly calm is the intimacy of heart, being able to really feel the the union of body and others and earth and death happening simultaneously. So because we've separated them, particularly death is death and love, and then in the middle is filled with fear. And fear is what keeps turmoil happening. There's the anxiety and fear and trying to solve the anxiety by doing more. So you see kind of the way that the intimacy of heart and life and dying and death and grieving are all this unity of heart and earth and death. That's why I mean the Native, well, when we say the Native Americans are the land, that's what we mean. That kind of awareness that for them, I don't know what to, well, yeah, they knew also, yeah, they knew also that the manner of maintaining that is living ritualistically. But that doesn't mean, I mean, so we have to kind of refine or that what earth is here, come to a unity with heart. And to live ritual doesn't necessarily mean formal ritual. It just means living bodily. That's ritual. I mean, they and the Native Americans didn't sit down and make a plan about their rituals. They were the natural movements of the body in relation to the earth and the sky and the planets and nature. It's just how do you express this unity? And you have to move.
Yeah. It's almost like the expression, well, I don't think it's like, the expression would have just emerged out of the interaction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's the natural way of that unity continuing.
But we've gotten to a place where we can appreciate, intellectually, we can appreciate the value of ritual or ceremony, but unfortunately, we're still stuck in our head. We can only think of it in terms of something you plan out and impose onto your world.
Yeah. So, but if we now imagine ritual not so much as a set of, certain kinds of action, but it's how we are with the world, having a sense of not just being with the world with what we do, but how are we with it? The soul, that's the soul sense. And so this is a ritual. What we're doing right now, we're in ritual
Mm.
very clearly. Look, it has a, or it's kind of, particularly if it's coming from not so much from what we already know, but it's kind of, taking what we know and remaking it into something new. That's ritual. Uh, and it can't be lived from here up. That's why, like when Jung went to Taos, New Mexico in 1925 and spent the day there with a Native American whose name is Mirabal. I happen to know his grandson.
Really?
He's a great musician, an astounding musician. Anyway, at the end of that day, Mirabal looked at Young and he said, "You all, you're kind of strange. These you people, you keep looking around all the time with your eyes, and you have thin lips, and you think with your head." And Jung said, "Well, yeah, everybody thinks with their head." And Mirabal just said, "So that now." So that should raise that question. Well, how can everyone now do that? In fact, that's not that. It's the opposite question. How can we not do that? I mean, the only way of not doing that is not being here,
Mm-hmm.
meaning living abstractly.
Mm-hmm. And fear is always an indication that not happening. It's not
Yeah.
the
Again, when Columbus and those people landed and Columbus called the Native Americans the moment he saw them, and who all came to greet them and welcome them and get to know who these what's wrong. And Columbus called them Indios, not Indians, in Dios, in God, in God, in the land, in God. He immediately saw that that's, and then what did he do? Oh, he took 1,000 of them to be slaves back. Their greed, watch that sense of greed is so interesting. Even to that it goes to that level of possessing human beings.
yeah. So this business about greed and earth and extraction, um, there's another element that figures prominently around natives, and that's the extraction of uranium.
Oh, yes, right. Yes, isn't that interesting? And it so bears a interesting relationship with New York City. I mean, because of the uranium and all of the major deposits of uranium are on Native American reservations, all of them. And I don't think it was planned that way. I think that you know, that we took the Native Americans, gave them places that seemed worthless, that turn out to be now, unfortunately, it's perceived as valuable land. Mm. And so all of the in the devising of the atomic bomb, all of the scientists and the planners and the financial people, they were housed in Empire State Building for years. That's where it was all worked out mentally. Not surprising. You have to go there, as well as all of the uranium that was being mined to, to make the bomb was stored, held on Long Island. So that is an interesting relation between that and New Mexico, I mean, where the bomb was exploded.
Yeah, you can almost see some kind of alchemy there that you're going to extract it in New Mexico, take it to the lab of New York, and then bring it back to New Mexico to detonate it.
I know, isn't that strange? It's like baptizing it in greed.
Yeah. It's almost like you can't turn the raw uranium into the weapon of mass destruction unless you go to New York.
Unless New York, and now metaphorically, it's like saying, unless you enter the conceptual abstraction of removing greed from its intimacy with death and earth.
Mm.
And then, see, it's like, then you have the tools to make an Ahrimanic world. That word Ahrimanic. That again, that Steiner has this amazing notion of it's what he calls the eighth sphere, and that's the work of Ahriman is to make this eighth sphere, which is it's a place that looks just like Earth, but is all the only thing that happens there is materialism, and that's and eventually Ahriman's aim is to be the sovereign figure of this place of pure materialism. And in another place, when somebody asked Steiner about the eighth sphere, and he said, well, it's all around us. Here it is. Meaning he understood that the eighth sphere wasn't out there somewhere. It's how we are with the earth here that can turn it into the eighth sphere. Meaning the place of pure materialistic forces.
Mm-hmm.
That are, I mean, the other aspect of that is the electromagnetic forces that are now dominating. Electromagnetism, magnetism, electricity in Earth, magnetic.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the danger we're in. I mean, it's just that we're being disembodied, becoming more and more disembodied.
Mm-hmm.
Hardened.
So we've reached this time, this amazing time where, I've often read things about empires when they fall. I don't want to talk about America as an empire, but how they always seem to crumble right after the maximum development and extension of their power.
Very important. Very important. In that, if we just again look at it descriptively, it's almost, it's almost, this is a necessity in a certain way. Like I've puzzled for years and years and years about over the Templars, because the Templars invented every modern sense of the way that we utilize greed. The Templars started the system of credit, money, banks. They, at any rate, but how can the temple? But they were also the Grail. They were completely connected with the Grail. How do those go together? And now we're kind of asking that same question. But I mean, it's not until we again really become absolutely conscious within the sense of death and greed, which is that we won't become conscious until that's at an end.
Yeah.
At an end, one can look at it and say, "Oh my God, look what we did," but don't take it as a judgment or anything. It's just now then something new awakens, and that actually needed all that kind of spiritually oppositional forces in order for the heart forces to strengthen. Oh, by the way, I can't bypass this. The Native Americans in that area of New York, the Lenape, the Delaware Indians, they're the ones that named Manhattan Mannahatta. And the word Mannahatta means the place of general intoxication. The intoxicate. Now that's so interesting. That see, they knew of the forces of death and destruction within the earth and love, and they also knew you can become intoxicated with them. Oh.
So at this moment of this heightened reality and growing awareness, it appears to be becoming, people are losing the ability to deny death.
Yeah. And again, it is so interesting that the place where things begin to break down the materialism of the world, where that most is now shows as something else arising, is also New York City. I'm sorry, this is about New York City so much, but it is. But look, now at the plaza, that and everything that has happened, that is a memorial to the event of 9/11. But it is so extraordinarily formed to be the opposite of what we've been describing as greed. Like, so the fountains there, the fountains go down, the water goes down. That's the tears of the earth, the tears of the earth. I know the architect of most of the plaza, Calatrava, just an astounding architect. And he's also commissioned to do a transportation center right at the end of the plaza where it's the primary place where everybody comes in and out of New York City. And his first design was in the architectural design. It was a gorgeous form that was in fact like an angel. It was intentional, but it didn't. It was an image. It wasn't an imitation picture. It was very, very beautiful. And the authorities in New York said it couldn't be built because it was too delicate. And So he had to redo it. But if you look at it now, the form of that building, it's like it's still in the form of an angel, but it's like a deformed angel.
Mm-hmm.
It's it had to bulk it up and so it's like more like an underworld angel. But that's a wonderful image, because now the underworld can also has a spiritual dimension. Or the third structure there is that the Greek Orthodox Church was destroyed. So their long process, they just finally completed that a couple of years ago. But it's a Greek Orthodox Church, so it has the dome. The dome, see, where you feel the spiritual layers of of the above coming down, and embracing Earth. Plus, they made that building in such a manner that the stone is translucent. So the light inside, is the light of the earth.
Right.
So, in many, I think that what we're seeing right now that seems like it is an ending, that began to happen with this recognition in the place of greed is also the place now that recognizes the livingness of grief.
Mm. Which will in turn bring us into a more, if we are with the grief, we will be more embodied. We will be more earth-bodied.
That's it's not tricky, but it's when we kind of work with, well, how is that going to happen? It doesn't. So the hope we have this imagination, but pretty much every indigenous people have a version of it, which is, but we have to try to do this descriptively. There's a sense in prophecies, the Hopi prophecies, they have to do with the tilting of the earth. That the earth is tilting off of due north, and it's the tilt is happening more and more rapidly. It's actually now about 64 degrees off of center.
Really?
They're even having to, they have to make flight adjustments to keep up with this, because otherwise. So they imagine at some point the Earth will flip. What was north will be south, and vice versa. Yeah. But that's kind of an imagination of what you just said. You see, if you take it imaginally, it's like saying, oh, it's the entry into an awareness of the heartful earth.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't, so we don't, but it also suggests, look, this is really, really, really radical, and we'll all feel it and experience it. It isn't somehow, see, we can't get there from greed directly. You can't do it. It's got to crumble. You're not going to convince anyone who's within the imagination of greed, I mean, to give all that away, even that's, watch how greed has got a hold of that with the people who have enormous sums of money. They give away enormous sums of money, but they keep enormous sums of money. So it's not really, it's an imagination of, well, with these forces of greed, we can make a better world.
Yeah.
But nothing has inwardly changed.
Right.
Mm.
And so even as things crumble, the forces of greed will try to manage that, but also in such a way, I mean, this is the whole
Yeah.
disaster capitalism thing.
Yeah.
Every disaster now has become an opportunity.
Yeah. Well,
Investment.
again, it's really, really important, and as you say, because those people who have these wonderful capacities, there are wondrous capacities of making money and thinking that way, and the technology that we have, all that's coming from these forces. So they know this is an end point. They're very, very aware of this as an ending. So they are working to manage that ending, not to stop it, but to manage it. Meaning of, well, when everything ends, how can we still be in charge? Oh yes, technocracy. we'll digitalize money, we'll disembody people, so we become uh, uh, what kind of intelligence, like artificial, all of that. But take it as an imagination, so you can see, um, well, that remaining and developing the capacity of heartfulness is unending. It can't get to a point where we develop these kind of inner heart forces, and then we can say, well, great, now we have them. It can't be that. It has to be a constant way of living that it always balances these other more harmonic forces.
And they can't be appropriated by those forces, can they?
No, it's totally different. But
Can they even be seen by those forces?
I don't think so. I mean, I say that from direct experience. Yeah, and that's just that's the way it is. It doesn't matter. It's not trying to make heart forces that's the difficulty in integral spiritual psychology. At least at the beginning, there was a tendency on my part too to see, well, heart awareness is that's just a nice, important way of developing as a human being in relation to other human beings, and it's therapeutic, and it's certainly better than living kind of abstractly. But the world dimension was not recognized. If the world dimension that we've been talking about isn't recognized and worked with, heart awareness can't endure. Can't. There's no way that it can endure, because it becomes like, now we've got it.
Right.
And it's like saying, or the same question, well, how do you ever get life in the sense of having it? Oh, now I have it.
Mm-hmm.
You can gradually feel more of a sense of the mystery and the depth and the unendingness and the unfolding of life, but you can never, and so you can't say, well, this heartfulness is the answer.
Right. You can't use it. It's not a tool to fix things. You almost wonder if that word develop can't really not appropriate.
It's not, because again, when those people land in America, the first thing they did was start developing it.
Yeah. Right.
So what do you, development's a difficult word. It's
So getting
noticing is a better word.
Yeah, noticing is, that is a mysterious word. I've been living
Yes.
with the word lately.
Yeah.
Mysterious phenomena.
Yeah. Particularly how you can remain in the heart and notice the surrounds. You see, that's what we have to do. I mean, it's not like suddenly, see, again, if heartfulness becomes the way, we would lose embodiment. We'd have a fantasy heart kind of experience.
Right. I slide back and forth between the two.
Oh, of course. I mean, so do I. I mean, it's not at that place where it can be sustained.
Right.
A lot of that is still the habits that we live.
But to do it, to be heartful in the presence of earth is so different than
Yeah.
my chair. And although the earth is in my chair too.
Yes. What isn't?
Yeah, what isn't? Yeah.
Yeah. And since it's not developing something, it's not doing practice to get somewhere, it's only practices of noticing. So it's just saying, well, it's saying we have to practice being completely natural.
Mm.
Isn't that strange? Because I don't think it's in any sense what we think of as spiritual. You know, because I don't, it's just being completely, utterly natural.
Yeah. It's so much of being spiritual is just some kind of respite from here.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's as well as, I mean, and part of that is that I unfortunately don't have those capacities. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like Steiner. I mean, and some other people who are really able to leave the body, go into 14 different levels of the spiritual world, see what the beings are, and more than that, seeing that all of those levels are forming this whole universe,
Mm-hmm.
and be able to see that and see which level has to do with what, and then develop it into some kind of practical work. That's and that's it's not, I it's astounding work. I've never been able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that fewer and fewer people will be able to do it because of this other strength of these other forces.
Right. And yet, I don't know if it's just introducing a term that's not helpful, but there is an initiation to be had, a type of initiation in and of the earth.
Yes, yes. That's saying that's the first one. If you bypass that, all the others are false.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And it also says there is no initiation without an anti-initiation also going on. So again, that says initiation doesn't mean I've got it. Now we can do that. If it's understood that way, it's not it's confined.
It's going back into the whole fix it.
Yeah.
So if initiation means the the emergence of newly created capacities in the world, then anti-initiation is something that rises up organically to meet that.
Yeah. It absolutely is constantly. I mean, this being of it's called Ahriman, and I mean, he's a permanent being. He's not saying, "Well, I give up."
Right.
Yeah.
No banishing Ahriman.
Yeah, and that's not. See, in a way we could say that's evil, force of evil, but evil is not evil, and as long as it's kept in connection with the good or heart, the evil is a certain kind of a necessary force because it keeps us developing. Sorry to use the word we just got rid. Keeps us noticing.
Yeah. I think one of the real obstacles to thinking this way, or even maybe perceiving this way, is that it's so impersonal.
Yes.
You know, I'm like, oh no. I'm living in a time where there's some sort of almost cosmic conflict happening, and what on earth does that mean for me? Right?
Right. Yes. Well, I mean that the me goes with the domain of Ahriman.
With the what?
That's Ahriman. The me is the Ahrimanic version of the I.
Mhm.
I is not me.
Mhm.
Like, you know, as you know, that everybody speaks of themselves as I. I can't I can't say to you, hi, how are you? So that's that's this ever-present spirit within us. And that what happens with the heartfulness is a kind of a dissolving of the me and the awakening of the I. So the question of, well, what does this all have to do with me disappears because the me is actually the I that is us and the world and the cosmos as one.
It's the part of uh, the the I is a part, it senses itself as part of the whole.
Yeah. I mean, because it's not something. So it is the awareness of the wholeness and multiplicity as intimately one, intimately. That's why it's interesting, and it's in relation to psychology and its legacy of, one on one. And because in when I work in working with people to awaken the heart capacities, we don't talk. We stay away pretty much from me or understand the stories of me in terms of heartfulness. What happens all the time is that any so-called psychological difficulties that people bring, they begin to dissolve without directly trying to focus on them. Because the soul then has a way into its place within the wholeness of the world, which is in the first place, the so-called difficulties have to do with that. I mean, means we get confined and they can't sort of get out of ourselves.
Mhm. Fear, alienation,
You know,
despair.
and being completely affected by these outer forces that kind of, in their own ways take over.
Yeah. So paradoxically or not, it's only by coming into relationship with the forces that you think are oppressing you that you may be freed of the tyranny of those forces.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, psychology, at least depth psychology, understood that. I mean, so that, say if you work in a Jungian fashion, and you work with dreams and images, and a person tells you a dream, you listen for, well, how are these images, here, not here. And once you have a sense of, oh, all my anger and furiousness, and that's kind of very Martian, Mars, fiery, and you can feel that imagistically, then we have a sense of, oh, this belongs. And in its belonging, it changes from being, uh, uh, directed and destructive and all of that. It becomes a will force in the world, or within the whole, can do something in the whole of the world. So I'm just only to say that in that integral spiritual psychology is in that stream.
I don't want to deviate too much, but it's in that stream, but it's the two, from where I sit, the two places where it's distinctive from that stream would be its orientation towards the future and its primary focus with earth and body.
Yeah. No, that's very, very right. And when, just to clarify, I know you sense it this way. Future doesn't mean the day after tomorrow. It means this aspect of creating, happening, and becoming is the ever-present presence of the time stream from the future. But you're right. No, I don't know anyone in depth psychology that has that kind of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so that makes a divide. I don't have many Jungian friends.
Really? Not down in Granbury, Texas?
Yes, right.
Oh, it was just there. The future. Oh yes. So what this really does, maybe this isn't really as relative to depth psychology, but it means that there's an acknowledgement that causality is only one lens through which to look at things, and it's not really accurate.
Yeah.
And yet we are tyrannised by the ideas of causality, past leading to future, logically necessary developments.
Yeah, it's beautiful and really important because it also makes us pay attention to this necessity of when heart awareness begins to awaken in some of the things that we've described. Then the effort and the endeavor is to be consistent. And that's more difficult to remain consistent as you're doing now. That answers or responds to
Yeah,
your.
no, it does. It does. Remaining consistent is very different than I got in a fight with my wife and I need to get centered and I'll go into my heart.
Well, here it means in the world. See, so we have this sense of world heartfulness that is always in connection with body, soul, death, even greed. But then how to live that. See, and that's where consistency comes in. If I have that, but then I'm out in the world, I forget it. So, and you're right. Then in the world, things don't happen causally anymore.
Yeah.
They don't. They happen synchronistically is the word. But synchronicity means like, oh, there's like holes in linear time. There are holes, and these show up in the world again. Like I said, like in the Peter Kingsley speaks. You're sitting there and you feel like, golly, I really want a donut. The work is to pay attention to that. Get up and go get a donut because it's not about the donut.
Right.
So if you go there, you'll notice something in the world because that was drawing you to notice the future arriving within the world. And you'll notice, I don't know what it would be, but it would be, it's not the donut.
Right. And if you're thinking causally,
Yeah.
you're thinking that's weird, or I'm hungry and I want a donut.
Yeah, period.
It's so funny. This morning when I was just kind of drinking coffee and getting ready, so synchronicity, synchronous phenomena is, in a way, it is awareness of it and its sort of growing ubiquity or whatever is symptomatic of the breakdown.
Yes.
And what it seems to suggest is that it means now things are much more fluid and dynamic, and a very small thing can affect, it's the butterfly effect now.
Right. Exactly.
And we have no way of knowing what that thing will be, that the tributary just moves in a different direction.
Yeah. But again, I was thinking of the donut again, and being to be in connection with this anti-initiation and how it works. So it says, golly, it's a hell of a lot of work to get in your car to go get a donut when you can call a delivery person.
Mm.
Well, and the other person says, oh, well, we have this machine now, that can squeeze out donuts as fast as you need them. See, that's all there too. And with that, you don't have to do anything. You just have to let go of some of your greed so that your greed will increase, so you'll have more to let go into these things. That's all going on. And it's not like that goes away.
Right.
It's not, but now we're saying, yes, but thank you, because that helps me work, and it takes a constant kind of awareness so that this can never become habitual consciousness.
Right. Right. So what was the word you used a minute ago? Consistency?
Yes.
Yeah.
Means that right now I do this too. I would talk this way and work this way and work with people this way and go out and work with nature this way. But then I go to town and, and then I fall back into the habits.
Mm-hmm.
Or even right here, see, like there's this enormous problem with the way we are in relation here, because in itself this removes heartfulness. This medium absolutely removes it. So a deliberate effort has to be going on. Otherwise, this will be taken as information. And if it happens to interest me, somebody looking, oh, that makes sense to me, then they'll watch it. But I don't know, see, if the sense of, it takes a long, long time for this awakening to the fullness of Earth and who she is and how heart and Earth are enfolded. That can't get across, can't get through the screen.
No, but we make the effort. We try to presence heartfulness to each other through the medium, which is probably the only thing we can do.
Yeah.
Assuming we're in this medium.
As well as this other awareness. Never, 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 ever lose this awareness of what we went through as who's here also. And not pretend like it's you and me and we can be in the heart. It's you and me and heart. Oh, and Oromon.
Yes.
That's the trick of Oromon, is to remain invisible and powerful.
To even try to realize the eighth sphere in a conversation about earth, heart, and awareness.
Yeah.
We could have gone a long time.
Oh my gosh. Piers, I don't know how to thank you for the courage. Courage is the beautiful word. It means, the doing of heart.
Mm-hmm.
So I am so grateful for your taking this on and working diligently, inwardly, contemplatively, and it makes possible these really, really wonderful conversations. Thank you.
Well, I can't thank you enough, and I'm thanking you also on behalf of the audience. So I've heard a lot of wonderful things.
Well, I hope we can find a way to continue in some manner later.
So it's just going to be the arduous process of agreeing on what we're going to do.
Yes.
But before we leave, I want to give you an opportunity to tell the audience about your new website.
Oh, thank you. Yes. It's this really kind of remarkable, strange website, as you might expect, in that in addition to articles and blogs, and it also has video and audio and has this Facebook-like dimension where people can speak with each other, but within the depth of what's being presented. Like all of our conversations are on there, and there's a series of videos on that help kind of get a sense of what is integral spiritual psychology. At any rate, it's www.rsardello.com. But there's a slight fee, a yearly small fee, that's just intended to, attract the people who are interested enough to then go ahead and join. And the next step, I know what we'll do. We'll have conversations on that.
Sounds great.
Great, thank you.
All right, well, you have a good day. Thank you again.
Thanks so much.